All right, with my upper radiator shroud in place, everything fitted in the location that it needs to be, I'm gonna go ahead and do some really quick work here with my air box. Now this, when I bought this, the previous owner had already done a zip tie mod, and the way he did it is he just left the filter box in its original orientation with the filter facing up, and he had just put his paper filter in there and zip tied the thing down with 4 zip ties. And you know, to be honest, I don't know that that is particularly sufficient. There's a he ditched the box, but he did not retain the piece that holds the edges in. So if you come over here and take a look at this filter that I'm about to put in, this is a K&N filter. By the way, the part number is there. It's that 33-2111. Anyway, sitting on top, I have this piece of the original stock filter housing. And the reason that you want to retain this is because this will sit over the top of the filter. And when you put your zip ties on and apply pressure, it will evenly apply pressure around the outer edges of the filter so that you don't develop a leak. I found with this one, the way that he had it, even though I've removed the zip ties, but you can see where they were, right here, 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 and here. I could get a finger under here and pry that up pretty easily. So wouldn't be too difficult to get some dirt behind there. So anyway, when you do your zip tie and flip mod, you can discard of that main restrictive covering, hold on to this guy, and then the last bit that the previous owner didn't do here in his zip tie mod is you're actually allowed to flip this guy over 180 degrees and cut a hole in this air plenum. And so basically what that allows us to do is create essentially a poor man's version of a cold air intake. So it'll be drawing cold air from the radiator plenum as opposed to sucking in hot air from the engine compartment itself. So I'm gonna go ahead and get to work on this. I've got another video on it before. Of course, the work was already done before I recorded that video. So I'll just take a minute here as I go to record how I do the cutting and whatnot to make it a little bit more obvious. Coming back in with just a quick tip. While you're taking this assembly apart, it's a good idea to clean your mass airflow sensor. Really all you do is you take some mass airflow sensor cleaner and spray it down in there in the sensor to clean up those wires, get any oil and dirt, debris off of them. But I also wanted to note, while I was taking a look at this thing, you can see all of the debris that got caught on the screen, which is essentially the proof to my theory about things getting past the air filter coming in at the edges. You can just see all the crap there that got caught on the screen. So I'll obviously get that cleaned out, but a little bit of proof in case you needed some extra motivation to hold on to that OEM piece to press down the edges of the filter. All right, checking back in. I've got my air bridge back together with the mass airflow sensor that's been cleaned. I've got my air box flipped 180 degrees, so that's ready to face down as I move along here. I have added a little piece that came with this K&N kit, which is essentially like a self-adhesive weather stripping, like a soft foam that goes around the outer edge to help seal off the filter. That did actually not come with the kit that I put on my other car. So I went ahead and threw this on here. I think it'll probably help. But what I have done in the past, and what I will do here even with this weather strip, is run a little bead of grease around the outer edge of the air filter so that when this thing sits down in here, see if I can do this one-handed. There we go. So when that sits down in, you've got just a little layer of grease between the air filter rubber and the air box itself. And then, of course, we'll take our stock retainer here, and that'll sit over the top of it. And then as we apply zip ties, then this should give us a nice even pressure, and that layer of grease will catch any dust that might otherwise get through if we didn't quite have enough. All right, one last look at this assembled unit before I go and start to trace out the opening in the radiator shroud. So I've got a couple of zip ties on here. I didn't go over the top. I like to go to the outside, although I don't know if that's necessarily the best answer, but just figure I'm going to try to get the most pressure out there. And it seems to be held down pretty well on the inside. If you get a look at your cover, you'll see that from the factory there are a couple holes right here. I've gone ahead and covered those up with duct tape. The reason for that is that when I cut my hole, it's gonna be exactly the same size as this outline for the filter housing, and this is just gonna sit down inside of that hole like a little pocket. All right, so I don't want to create any kind of a leak here where additional air could escape out of the radiator plenum after all the work that I did to seal off the sides and whatnot. So we'll keep that nice and tight by having that closed up and keeping the hole very, very close to the size of this airbox assembly. Well, with my airbox back in the car and in its position, I've gone ahead and marked my edges. Just kind of got this guy aligned and then took a Sharpie and went around to mark everything. Fortunately, this plenum is pretty dusty, so it shows up well. So I marked top, side, bottom, all the way around. So what I will do now, just to make this a little bit easier, is go ahead and pull that plenum back out, and I'll do my cutting and fitting outside of the car now that I know the rough location. All right, checking back in, I've got a hole in the radiator shroud. Way I ended up doing it was just with an angle grinder and cutting. The plastic does get a little bit melty, so once that happens, when it's finished, you may want to just touch it up a little bit with a file to get some of the plastic burrs off, but otherwise it came out pretty clean. My original measurements were a little bit off, so I just kind of squared everything up once it was outside of the car, and I kind of knew roughly where it wanted to be, so that's nice and straight now. You'll see I've got a couple of holes over here. This is actually at the bottom. I've got this guy sitting essentially upside down so that just the angle suits me. But basically, while I had the air intake on here, I drilled a couple pilot holes so that I can fasten this guy down. Let's see if I can get this in place here. You'll kind of see what I'm talking about. So you'll see on each side now, I've got a couple pilot holes. What I'll be able to do with those now is grab some nutserts, get those implanted into my airbox here. And then from the other side, from underneath the car, I'll be able to just screw in a couple of screws to hold this piece in place so that I keep a nice tight seal. I have seen where you get enough pressure down inside of that radiator plenum that it can push this guy up and out, and then you lose your seal. So I'll be doing that, and then this will be going back in the car. All right, just checking back in. I've got my shroud is back in. You can see it's got a big old hole in it for the airbox. I've got my nutserts inserted here into this retainer for the air filter. One thing I didn't mention, but I went ahead and did here is if you did the air system delete earlier, I don't think I covered this when I did mine. I went ahead and wanted to plug this hole. As it happened, I have an assortment of basically grommet hole plugs. And so I grabbed a 1-inch grommet. You can see, whoops, here we go, that the center portion is plugged. I like to have some of these because I can drill them out for whatever size I need, or I can just use them to plug something up. Anyway, that fit in that in the hole in the side of the airbox perfectly. So that's all sealed up. I don't have to think about it anymore. And this guy is now ready to just drop back in place. Okay, just button it up down here on the bottom. You can see I've got my air filter in place. I've got a couple of screws, one over here and one over here, just holding the plastic shroud down, so that keeps it all nice and airtight. You can kind of see up here where my duct tape is, and that's also why you want to go ahead and block that out, because you would have a couple of pretty decent size holes. But otherwise, that's it. That's a poor man's cold air intake that is allowed in Spec Corvette. Something you'll probably want to do so you're not breathing a bunch of hot air.